The so-called mega drought that is afflicting the American West is the worst in 1,200 years. That's according to a study published yesterday.
We heard about the water restrictions in Los Angeles, and we just thought, boy, if this isn't a sign, then I don't know what is.
While many Californians have restrictions on watering their lawns, authorities in southern Nevada are taking even more drastic measures.
Well, my name is John Perry. I'm the owner and founder of Green County Fertilizer Company, and I also have a YouTube channel called Lawncology. I have been in the industry as far as lawn and landscape for 27 years, pretty much all out west. I've lived in California for a little while, seen the drought in action there. I currently live in Utah, drought in action here, spent some time in Nevada, drought there. I've kind of gone through the whole thing, and dealing with water restrictions and healthy plants and turf is kind of second nature for me now at this point.
Thank you for joining. My name is Michael. I'm with Best Consumer. Tell us a little bit more about Lawncology. What do you do? What's the purpose of your social media channels? What are you trying to educate consumers about?
Sure. So for the most part, I just like to talk about lawn care in general. So it's a lot of things just around the home. I teach about lowering inputs as far as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, how you can have a healthy lawn with less inputs, less insecticides, less herbicides. I kind of teach more of a conservation method, and that includes the soil profiles, and sort of educating people on what's possible with their growing area, their growing medium, and just maximizing their overall results through a slightly different method than what would be considered the typical norm, and just showing what's possible.
What is needed for someone who wants to build a lawn? What is the right approach? What shall a person do?
There are a number of different ways, and honestly, it depends on geographically where you're located, what your soil looks like, what perhaps was taken away as your home was built, what topsoil was stripped away. For me, just sort of as a baseline, when I'm putting in new lawn, new installation, putting in turf or seed or anything like that, there's a couple of different methods that I take all the time. A topsoil layer moving between 3 and 6 inches. Start with 6, it packs down to 3. I tend to mix some other things into that soil as well, some humic material, some extra organic matter, and then even in my own personal lawn. And one of the things that kind of got me into the water conservation side was using water absorbing polymers in the soil as well before planting or before putting sod down. So in my own personal property here in Utah, where we've been in drought for a number of years, I water significantly less than anybody else and have the healthiest lawn. So I'm used to being able to take things to a point of, getting the roots down deeper and allowing for a more, conservative approach that just yields an incredible result. So that's typically how I would take things.
We are familiar with Israel experience where people have learned to grow beautiful plants with practically no water. What shall Californians do, and Utah residents, Nevada residents, what shall they do to preserve the lawn or teach their plants to absorb less liquid?
When I lived in California, we were going through droughts. I moved back to Utah about 7 years ago. So it was about 7 years prior to that time. So we kind of had the ups and downs and saw the reservoirs go way down. My soil where I was outside the Santa Cruz area, it was sand. Everything around there was sand. There was no stability. So any water you put down, gone, just like that. And there isn't a good way to water that heavily and expect a long-term result. It's something that takes this kind of small amounts on a regular basis. And if you are able to do that, to not be limited to say once a day, or I'm sorry, once a week to put water out, you actually will use less water over time because people aren't trying to make it all up at one heavy watering. So, for California, what's changed a lot there is that people are getting rid of lawns left and right. They're taking their landscaping down to zero. They're doing a lot of xeriscaping. They're doing a lot more gardening and clearing out the grass. And for me, I see more of a problem with that later, depending on what they're putting in and what they're putting in place, because Grass has incredible cooling effects. Obviously, it's like a filtration plant. When water comes through from rainfall and things, to be able to move through that profile is really good for the environment in general. So, I get a little nervous about some of these more impermeable surfaces that are going in. And really, 95% of the water in California goes to agriculture right now. That's really where it's headed. And the rest of it is for drinking and for lawns. And there's just not there isn't enough of it if you go through drought this many years in a row to where they're never going to sacrifice the food or the crops. That is always going to take primary focus. So it will likely, and sad to say, for most Californians, they're going to be giving up their lawn, and it's going to cost them money. It's they're going to lose it. It's probably going to die, and there's not much to do if it's already there. If you're starting from scratch, however, there are things you can do to put in a lawn, like I said, that doesn't require a whole lot of water, that could actually conserve and last for a long time. And I think that is it's just been overlooked for too long about how the installs go and then what's possible going later, if we do go into these 5-year droughts, 7-year droughts. So the mindset of the soil really has to change. Like how do you increase the water holding capacity of the soil that you have to allow for the most efficient uptake of water for your lawn? And ultimately, that holding capacity is what's going to allow for less water to be applied. So the mindset has to change, and sometimes the death of a landscape is what it takes.
Today, Californian who had their loans for 20, 30 years, if I understood you correctly, is your recommendation to completely remove the old loan, and if the person is to rebuild it with a new approach to have more water absorbing soil, what would your recommendation be? Or maybe it's different watering approach that you would recommend.
I wouldn't recommend anybody lose their lawn. I feel like this is something that's going to happen just because water is going to be shut down to such a point that it will be nearly impossible to maintain unless you're cheating, as it were. And when I lived there, people were they weren't very nice. If they saw somebody watering, they would report it. They would call the water company. It was like water police. And I understand that because there is enough of a fear about it. And if somebody is being abusive with water, you kind of, nobody wants to waste. That's just money, right? And I think that for most people, most consumers, when you're talking about conservation or anything like that, it has to be equated to dollar signs. If you're being wasteful, you're wasting money every single time. So if you're watering inefficiently, you're wasting money, not just wasting a resource, but something that's going to hit you in the pocketbook, right? So I think for a lot of people, a more efficient watering system is the most important thing. So perhaps it's swapping heads out on an existing lawn and getting more lower flow, but looking at things like ET controllers that are going to, tell your system like, hey, there's this much evapotranspiration that happened. We're going to go ahead and water. So it's on more of a system that's actually monitoring. So it's not just set it and forget it, which is where I think is probably the worst American mentality. I'm going to put it that way. Like it is what it is. It's you set the timer and you never change it. And then you wonder either why it's all brown or why it's always soaking wet. You don't really ever change your model. So using more technology would be extremely beneficial for most people who are trying to keep their lawn, trying to save their lawn, and trying to work through restrictions. Years ago, here, so this is going back probably to 2000, 2001 kind of time frame. If you were to put on a receiver and have an ET controller, then you did not have to follow the watering restrictions set forth by your water district because it was being properly monitored. So they knew it wasn't just going to come on and run for 10 or 12 hours because the system was going to say. So it was like a pass to allow for efficient watering. And I believe that's something that could be put into play more, with some of these districts to say, look, if you're using something technology wise, if you are aerating and top dressing with compost and putting more organic matter in the soil, all of these things like that. will make a major impact on the overall use of the water that's going into the lawn.
So your view on California and western parts of United States, you think significant droughts are to continue and lawns may just disappear?
I feel that it's a trend that is happening. Um, and for sure in California, there was a big push when, and it's probably still going on, that was grow food, not lawns. And you would see signs in people's front yards that, had removed all their turf and they had raised beds and whatnot that they were growing. And that was the push. Grow food, not lawns. And, unfortunately, it came from a little bit of a different viewpoint. It was more of a chemical scare. People worried about the different pesticides and whatever was going on to a lawn. That was what the main concern was: is carcinogens and things like that. So you know the thought of removing a lawn was going to remove a big chemical footprint, not necessarily water, because if a garden goes into place and you're doing vegetables and all of these other things, they also take a significant amount of water. But people view a lawn as a wasteful space. So I I don't agree with that. And coming from my background, I have had very large lawns that are 10, 15, 20,000 square feet that I maintained. And then when I was in California, it was about 250 square feet. Tiny. That was all there was of a lawn. And when it's that small, or when you're living in sort of that type of a postage stamp area, there almost is no reason to have that anyway. It becomes like, what's the point of that? Why am I putting the effort in? But say where I am now, I'm in the desert, high desert. I still have what would be sort of a less than average sized lawn for the country. I've run about 2,500 to 3,000 square feet here. National average is like 4,000 square feet or so. And I wanted to be responsible with the amount of turf that I had in. But this is part of my lifestyle, my family's lifestyle. It's being out on the grass, it's enjoying the grass, it's feeling that cooling on a hot day when you can go sit on your lawn and the temperature is much cooler than anywhere else. And again, I don't waste water. And here we have it's going to get down to 1 day a week watering restriction. Right now it's 2 days, pretty much every year. It's the same way. I'm just going to say it. I ignore that. I totally ignore it. I water the lawn as needed. And that keeps me so far below what everybody else is doing. I have a flat water, the lowest amount that I pay. I just want everybody out there, the consumers, to realize this. My water bill is $70. That's what it is, unless I go over, and then it starts to really climb. I have never gone over that, and the total gallonage is 16,000 gallons. My neighbors, same size lawn, they're paying 3 to 4 times as much as I am because they're doing it inefficiently. So I know how it works. I know what it looks like when grass is dry, and I know how to water into that. But that's just me paying attention and using technology to my favor, using my smart irrigation system, that's vitally important. And then your lawn is not this wasted space. It's not this thing that's sucking up natural resources. It really doesn't even require that much fertilizer. I mean, there's so much. 5 years, I didn't put a single herbicide on my lawn, didn't have any weeds anywhere. Because why? I watered it properly and I cut it properly. So maintenance was all it took to have a very beautiful landscape and never feel wasteful on anything.
Water consumption of the garden per square yard of lawn, or have a peach tree. Peach tree also requires water. Is there a significant difference between water for the lawn versus a tree?
Yes, water for trees versus lawns, absolutely. You can get away with a number of just gallons, 10, 12, 15 gallons a year for a single tree. It doesn't really require a significant amount of water, and that the roots are tapping down into water that you're not getting to anyway, 3, 4, or 5 feet down, where the soil remains moist, and it's just going to do what it needs to do. That would be different with crop production. If you're trying to grow almonds in California or anything like that, that's going to require a lot more water because water is required for fruit and for bloom. So it's a little different than with a lawn. Most lawns in the heat of the summer, really kind of the minimum water requirements are about 1.5 inches of water weekly. Take that over however much space you want to. That's kind of the number that you're going to get. So it's doesn't have to be there, but most people, again, they're going to set up a system in a way that gets that every single week, no matter what, no matter what the demand is, they're going to put the same amount on. When really it's in the heat, the hottest and the driest time where you need the water for conservation. The beauty about turf, and especially it kind of depends, it's going to vary by region, cool season grass, warm season grass. Where I am, middle of summer, the grass pretty much slows down to where it's not really going to grow. It's not its time to grow. So it actually really doesn't require that much water because it's not forcing growth and pulling more water up into its tissue. So I'm able to kind of conserve even then. In more southern places where you've got Bermuda or St. Augustine and things like that, they are in the height of the growth during the hottest summer months. So the folks in San Diego that are dealing with Bermuda and zoysia and things like that, they might have a little bit of a different type of watering schedule than somebody that would be further up north. And it just sort of shifts though. Summer is not that long. It's not that long. And I think that people forget that. It's like they think that this is a demand all the time. It's not a demand all the time. It is a demand part of the time. And it's the rest of the time when grass goes dormant, there's no water going out anyway. So, for me here, I have about 3 and maybe 4 months where I would need to run my irrigation out of 12. And that's it. Right. So I feel, again, if people just pay attention, everything would be just fine. But, typically turf is going to be somewhere around 1.5 inches a week for its, basic demands in the summertime.
What is the best time during the day or during the night to water the lawn?
What you really want to do is try to preserve the coolness of the soil as long as possible. Okay. So really watering early in the morning and even up into sunrise is going to be your best options no matter what, because that's when the temperatures start to come off. The big reason, the way that you're sort of preventing stress on the turf is by cooling off the soil. You're cooling off the plant. When the plant gets hot, it suffers and starts to shut down. So the more water you can get in as temperatures rise, the cooler that plant is going to stay. Once the sun goes down, everything's cooling off anyway. So you're not giving it any benefit of more cooling at that time. You're actually, if you start watering when the sun goes down and you do it, say, before midnight, and that's your time frame, you're probably losing more to just groundwater and loss than you would if you waited a little bit longer to when the plant is going to take the demand on that water.
So the watering at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning is probably the better time that you are suggesting.
I tend to start mine around 5, even 6 o'clock in the morning. Really, when it's starting to get light here is about when I run mine. And I have a lot of very low flow, the MP rotors that don't put out a whole lot of gallons per minute. And I just kind of run everything through, just a short little sessions to get enough water that I need.
Thank you. Is there a system that you would recommend for running the watering?
I use just a kind of honestly, it's a generic smart controller. It's made by Orbit. It's called the Beehive. Mine is a 16 station system. And I'll tell you why, because I said I had a kind of small lawn. I have a 2,500 square foot main lawn, but I also have a 1,000 square foot putting green that I mow at less than 1/10 of an inch. That's bent grass on sand. So I had to make sure I had enough just to, get all of these little stations out there. And even with that, it doesn't take much water. So the Orbit Beehive is one that can have an ET controller connected to it. Rakio system is another one that's out there. Rainbird obviously makes those. Hunter, I believe, has one that you can do ET controllers on as well. Most of these, even if you don't do the ET controller, they have weather sensors. They're hooked to your Wi-Fi, and they'll shut off if they know rain's coming. They do all of that kind of stuff for you. So even that makes a big difference. But there is something about walking onto the grass and feeling it to know if it needs it or not. We lose touch. That's the biggest thing I'll say. And one of the big things I just love to convey to people is you need to touch this grass. You need to see your soil. You need to be a part of what you're trying to grow. This is your little plot of land, and you should know it and you should care for it. if you want it to be beautiful and flourish. It can't just be done with machines.
John, thank you very much. With this, I would be wrapping up our conversation. Is there anything that you would like to share with our consumers, viewers, who's going to be seeing it?
My biggest concern with water restrictions, no matter where they are, is that every time I've seen one put into place, more water is used. Every time. Every time. When I was in Reno, what would happen is there were 2 days a week that could water. If you were on one side of the street, it was one day, other side of the street, it was next. Every single person would fire on those sprinklers up and down every lane that was on an even numbered, and it would tax the water system so bad that the water in the sprinklers wouldn't have enough pressure to water a lawn effectively. And people would do more and more and more, and they would water it all night. Somebody did an audit on that and said, we need to just get rid of it. In the first season out that happened, water usage went down by like 30%. So get rid of the restrictions and people watered less. It's that sort of scarcity mentality that people have. Like, it's here, I'm going to use as much of it as possible, which is so backwards if you're trying to do any sort of conservation. And that's what I would have people look out for. I already know it's happened. Talking to a customer of mine in Florida. Same thing is going on down there right now. They've got 1 day a week up in the Jacksonville area, and people are just on that day running and running and running and running and running irrigation all day. And it's has no effect because their soil is sandy and it's dry in 2 or 3 days. It doesn't do any good. So the grass is dying. It's just dying. So if you're out there and you're on a water board, really look at that. You have to understand most people are going to take as much as they can get in the limited time they have it, rather than to space things out and really know how to conserve something. So teach a man to fish. Don't take away their rod.